They called me an idiot, mute, broken. I didn't utter a single word for 3 years at Sunshine Grove Orphanage, and every child there thought they knew why. They thought I couldn't speak. They thought there was something wrong with me. What they didn't know was that I understood every cruel word they said. I understood every single one. My IQ is a little higher than average, a full 165. I guess that's why everything sticks in my mind so easily. My name is Emma, and I'm the true story of how the girl everyone mocked became the woman who destroyed the family that tried to break her. Listen to the end, because you want to hear what happened at that dinner table 17 years later. At that moment, everyone will understand how secrets buried for decades were revealed. Click the subscribe button now, because this revenge took years, and you won't believe how everything fell apart. Let me take you to where my silence began. I was 8 years old. I was sitting in the corner of the Sunshine Grove dormitory. That was my place. The only place the other kids mostly left me alone. The cold November air seeped in through the cracked windows, and I pulled my thin blanket tighter around my shoulders. 23 other kids shared this room, and most were noisy, constantly trying to get attention from the staff, the visitors, anyone who could take them home. That's childhood for you. But I wasn't one of them. I was quiet and invisible. Marcus, the oldest, was big for his age and used that to terrorize anyone he saw as small and powerless. That day, he came right up to my corner with his gang of friends. "Hey, you silly girl," he said, kicking my pile of books. "Still pretending to read? We all know you can't even talk. You probably can't read either." I didn't look up. I just focused on the worn, old French novel in my lap and continued reading. "I'm talking to you." Marcus snatched the book from my hand. Finally, I turned my gaze to him. His face took on that cruel expression I'd seen before. They were laughing at me, along with the 5 children behind him. "This is in a different language," Marcus said, squinting at the pages. "You're a total freak. You can't even read normal books." He threw the book across the room. Its spine cracked when it hit the wall. Something inside me cracked, but I didn't want to show it. I stared at him blankly until he got bored and walked away. Later that night, after the lights went out, I crawled across the cold floor and secretly retrieved my book. The pages were slightly bent. In the darkness, I whispered to myself in my perfect French, "They fear what they don't understand, and I understand everything." That was my secret. While the other children played and fought, I learned. The donation boxes were full of discarded books in languages the staff couldn't read: Spanish textbooks, Chinese children's stories, Arabic poetry collections, French novels. Things people threw away because they seemed useless. These were the things I knew best. I had built them all myself, while everyone else slept at night. Yes, it might sound crazy to you now, but I was already in an orphanage, and I had 2 options. Either I'd just be a spoiled brat like the others, or I'd learn different languages that interested me. So, without telling anyone, I built myself up. But I never spoke. The orphanage director, Mrs. Patterson, tried it first. She brought in counselors, psychologists, speech therapists. They would ask me questions, show me pictures, and offer me candy if I said a single word. Any word. I would just stare at them silently until they left. They gave up on me and labeled me unable to speak, mute. They wrote it in my file, and after that, visitors who came to adopt me quickly scrolled through my page. No one wanted the broken, silent girl. That wasn't a problem for me. I'd seen what happened to adopted children. Some were returned within a few weeks, rejected like defective goods. Others never returned, but it was clear in their eyes during the mandatory monthly checkups. They'd swapped one prison for another. I preferred my corner, my books, and my silence. And finally, it was time to change everything. It was a freezing afternoon in the middle of winter. 3 years after I arrived at Sunshine Grove. I was 11 years old now, older than most of the children but younger than Marcus and his group. I was sitting in my usual spot, reading a Spanish travel book someone had donated. I read as much as I could, even though I couldn't understand everything. Emma Chen. Mrs. Patterson's sharp voice cut through the noise of the dormitory. Come with me. Now. Everyone started looking at us because whenever she called out in that tone, something important was happening. My heart was pounding, but I maintained my usual expression. She led me to the office. 2 people were sitting in chairs opposite her desk. The woman was dazzling in her polished, expensive style. Perfect blonde hair, designer clothes, jewelry probably more expensive than the entire orphanage. The man next to her wore a suit that was a display of wealth. They both smiled when I entered, but their smiles didn't reach their eyes. Emma, these are Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, said Mrs. Patterson, her voice suddenly sweeter than it had ever been with us children. They're very interested in adopting you. I stood there quietly, watching what was happening. Mrs. Thompson leaned forward, her perfume very strong in the small office. Hello, Emma. My name is Victoria. We've reviewed your file and we think you would be perfect for our family, she said. Her face looked kind. She had said perfect. No one had ever used the word perfect for me before. Mr. Thompson, Richard, looked at his expensive watch. We have a daughter around your age, Ashley. She's very excited to have a sister. I didn't believe it for a second. The children of the rich didn't like orphans entering their perfect lives. But I kept quiet, watching them carefully. Emma doesn't talk, Mrs. Patterson explained quickly, almost apologetically. But she's very well behaved. No behavioral problems. She won't cause any trouble. That's good, said Victoria, though her smile was strained. We believe every child deserves a chance. They talked about me as if I weren't even there. They discussed paperwork, home visits. Richard kept looking at his watch. Victoria kept adjusting her jewelry. Neither of them looked directly at me for more than a few seconds. That was another reason for me to suspect they were a bad family. I understood then. They were going to adopt me to prove to the world that they were charitable. I was just a tool for them. We'll soon find out if I'm right. But the point is, I didn't care about their reasons. This was my way out of Sunshine Grove, to get away from Marcus and his cruelty, to get away from the cold dorm, the pitying stares, and the broken girl label that followed me everywhere. So when Mrs. Patterson gave me a pen and paper and asked if I wanted to go with the Thompsons, I wrote one word in perfect handwriting: yes. Victoria Thompson clapped her hands together as if I had pulled a cute trick. Great, this will be perfect. She used the word perfect again. 2 weeks later, I left Sunshine Grove Orphanage forever. I packed my already meager belongings and left. Carrying my books was a chore. I had never had to carry them all together before. I walked toward the Thompsons' luxury car, which probably cost more than everything else in the orphanage combined. As I drove away, I watched the building disappear in the side mirror. I felt no positive or negative emotions. The only thing that made me happy was that I could improve myself by reading better books here. The drive to Thompson Manor took 2 hours. Victoria first tried to strike up a conversation, asking questions she knew I couldn't answer. Finally, she gave up and spent the rest of the trip on her phone, talking to someone about a charity gala. Richard drove silently, probably already regretting his decision. Finally, we arrived at the manor. My jaw dropped. White columns, perfectly manicured lawns, a circular entranceway with a fountain in the middle. It wasn't a house. It was an expression. Welcome home, Emma, Victoria said with that forced smile. The front door opened and a girl about my age stood there. Ashley Thompson. She had her mother's blonde hair and blue eyes, But while Victoria had her usual politeness, Ashley's face held pure contempt. She examined the bag containing the clothes and books I'd taken from the orphanage. Not content with that, she scrutinized me from head to toe. She looked at me as if I were an alien. "Is this the orphan?" Ashley said to her mother. "She looks so poor." "Ashley!" Victoria's voice was quite harsh. She was stern, but stern because she had to be. I could see the pleasure in her eyes. Home. Another wrong word. The front door opened and a girl about my age stood there. Ashley Thompson. She had her mother's blonde hair and blue eyes, but while Victoria had the usual politeness on her face, Ashley had pure contempt. She scrutinized me from head to toe, examining the plastic bag containing my donated clothes and belongings. "Is this the orphan?" Ashley said to her mother. "She looks so poor." "Ashley!" Victoria's voice was harsh, but I saw a glint of approval in her eyes. "Be kind to your new sister," she said. I had no intention of being her sister. A maid escorted me to my room. It was bigger than the entire dorm in Sunshine Grove, a four-poster bed with silk sheets, a table by the window. Victoria's choice, Ashley's style, none of it my style. I dropped my plastic bag onto the milky white carpet. It didn't belong there, just like me. "Dinner is at exactly 7, said the maid. "Mrs. Thompson expects you to dress appropriately." She pointed to the closet and left. I had 3 hours to get ready. For those 3 hours, I started exploring the cafe. The Thompson estate had everything. A library filled from ceiling to ceiling, most untouched, seemingly bought for decoration. There was a pool, a tennis court, even a home theater. Everything screamed, "I'm expensive." On the second floor, I found Ashley's room. The door was open, and she was laughing with someone on the phone. "I know, right? My family adopted an orphan. They literally brought his belongings in a garbage bag. This is going to be hilarious." I slipped away before she noticed me. 5 minutes before she arrived, I came down with the clothes I'd just taken from the closet. They were waiting in the dining room, as if they'd set a table for royalty. "Oh, thank goodness you found the clothes," she said, barely looking at me. "Tonight is important, Emma. We have guests arriving. Richard's business partners. You're going to sit quietly and look presentable. That's all we ask of you," he said, as if I were prone to causing trouble. He told me to sit quietly, as if I'd shown any other side of myself. The doorbell rang. Richard opened the door and 4 people entered. 2 couples, all dressed as if they'd just come from a club. They planted kisses on Victoria, shook Richard's hand, and barely noticed Ashley's presence. They certainly didn't see me standing there. "Shall we begin?" Victoria gestured towards the dining room. The doorbell rang again. The table seated 8. I sat between Ashley and one of the female guests. Everyone else was talking loudly about the stock markets, vacation homes in the Hamptons, and whose yacht was bigger. I remained silent, examining the 5 forks and 3 spoons in front of me, wondering why so many cutlery were needed. Of course, it was a fancy dinner I didn't recognize. "Victoria," said one of the guest women, "I hear you've completed the adoption. What a charitable act." The word I found odd was charitable, as if it were a swear word. "Yes," said Victoria, smiling. "This is Emma. We're so lucky to be able to give her a better life." All eyes turned to me. I kept my expression unchanged, my hands in my lap. I continued to remain silent. But the triumph I was about to experience was already screaming. "She's not talking," Ashley added hastily, her voice filled with feigned concern. "There's something wrong with her brain." "Ashley!" Victoria's voice had sharpened, but I saw the glint of embarrassment in her eyes. "It's all right," Richard said softly. "Emma is getting used to it. These things take time." The guests exchanged glances. One of the men, I'd heard him called Mr. Whitmore, leaned forward. Well, Emma, what do you think of your new home? The guests waited for an answer, but none came. The silence grew longer, more uncomfortable. I could feel Ashley's self-satisfied pleasure beside me. That's exactly what my so-called sister wanted. She enjoyed me humiliating her parents in front of the guests. I continued eating my soup. Poor girl, she's probably getting bored, Mrs. Whitmore said with exaggerated sympathy. It's such a big change. Victoria, where did you say you were coming from? Sunshine Grove, Victoria said nervously. A very respectable establishment. I'm sure, said Mrs. Whitmore, in a tone that implied she wasn't at all sure. The conversation continued. The chat lengthened. Dishes were brought and gone, drinks exchanged. Each one was prepared with care. Then dessert arrived, and the problems began. No one could have imagined what was about to happen. Mr. Whitmore was telling a story in French, something about a business deal in Paris. He was clearly showing off, using unnecessarily complex French expressions. Richard and Victoria nodded, pretending to understand more than they did. But Mr. Whitmore made a mistake. A very big mistake. He confused investissement with investiture, completely altering the meaning of his story, turning it from a business investment into a ceremonial setup. His story became utterly meaningless. I felt my eye twitch. It was a very small movement, but Mrs. Whitmore noticed. Did you get it, dear? She asked mockingly. Of course, that's how it looked from those around us. She looked at me with contempt. Everyone stopped talking. Ashley was grinning, sitting silently, waiting for me to confirm what they were all thinking. That I was slow, damaged, broken. Victoria's face was tense. Emma wouldn't. He said investiture, but he meant investissement. I said clearly, in perfect Parisian French. His story makes no sense this way. Silence fell over the table. The clinking of bracelets on the women's arms could be heard. Mr. Whitmore's face turned bright red. Do you speak French? Surprise upon surprise, the girl they had judged mute, unable to speak just 10 seconds ago, was now giving a French lesson. But it wasn't over yet. I switched languages. I also speak Spanish, and Mandarin, and Arabic. Is there anything more you want to know? Mrs. Whitmore's soup spoon clanged into her bowl. Ashley's mouth dropped open. Richard, his wineglass to his lips, stood frozen. Victoria looked like she was about to faint. I'd been silent for 3 years, waiting for this moment to show them what they'd lost. I looked directly at Mr. Whitmore and switched back to English. Investiture, you said, but you meant investment. Your whole story was full of grammatical errors. No one but me bothered to correct you because you have mutual interests. Or they're truly ignorant. The room temperature dropped to 20 degrees. Then I turned to Ashley. From now on, no one should call me stupid, idiotic, or mute. I heard every cruel thing you said on the phone before. In this house, those walls are thinner than you think. Ashley's face changed from shock to horror. She knew I'd said far more than I'd mentioned. I looked at Victoria and Richard. You needed a charity case to look good at parties, or a puppet to put on display. But no one ever asked why I was silent. Did you ever wonder if I chose not to talk to people who weren't worth talking to? Victoria was the first to speak. Emma, this. Ni men yue wo tingbudong. I continued in Mandarin, then switched to Arabic. Entum la tarifuna shay'an anni. I stood up and placed the napkin on the table. Thank you for dinner. The food was delicious, and the conversation was very informative. I walked out of the dining room, and knowing that there were 8 people behind me with their mouths agape in astonishment was frankly reassuring. As I climbed the stairs, sounds rose from the dining room, shouting, anger, embarrassment. It was all there. Victoria was apologizing to the guests dozens of times. Richard wanted to know what had happened. Ashley was crying. As usual, I went to my room and continued reading in my corner. But my hands were trembling. Years of silence were over, but the real fun was about to begin. In that dorm, I learned not only languages but also patience and strategy. Friends, communication is very important. When you enter a room, no matter how stylish you are, how many designer clothes you wear, how many expensive watches you have, it's all about speaking. If you have impressive communication skills, you create an aura. That's why reading books is essential. If you want to witness stories where pain turns into strength, you are invited to my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. I'm waiting for your comments.